welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a seriously fascinating journey. We're going on a narrative ride that stretches from the grand, sweeping landscapes of the globe all the way down to the microscopic shivering of a single muscle fiber. We're tracking an invisible hand that shapes literally every aspect of life on Earth. And that invisible hand? Well, it's temperature. It dictates where animals can live, how massive they grow, and exactly how they survive the absolute extremes of our planet.
Okay, let's dive into this. Consider the mighty polar bear. They are the absolute largest of all known bear species, just constantly patrolling the freezing Arctic. Have you ever wondered why the bears living in the most punishing, heat-starved environments on Earth are also the most massive? I mean, it's not a coincidence. It is a profound biological rule written by temperature itself. But to really understand how this invisible force dictates nature, we've got to start by looking at the big picture.
Section 1. Defining animal populations, taking the macro view. To see this invisible hand at work, ecologists first have to zoom out and draw a boundary around a group of animals. This brings us right into population ecology. Technically, a population is a group of interbreeding individuals in the same area at the same time. But, nature doesn't exactly provide neat little dotted lines on a map for us. Those boundaries are incredibly fluid. They're usually constrained by physical geography or human development. Think about the tule elk out in Northern California. They were driven to near extinction, reintroduced to Point Reyes National Seashore, and by 2009, that population bounced back to over 440 individuals. Or consider the Anaheim cougars down in Southern California. Their populations are semi-isolated in these small mountain ranges, and they rely heavily on really narrow vegetated corridors along streams just to travel and survive. If a proposed urban development severs that corridor, that isolated population shrinks and could face local extinction.
And this brilliantly illustrates why understanding these population dynamics is absolutely critical. When we know the birth rates, death rates, and density limits of an area, we can actively manage species recovery. Take the gray wolves up in the Northern Rockies. After being completely eliminated in the wild, they were reintroduced. By relying on strict population ecology data, managers can track their growth rates to ensure the species recovers without letting them overpopulate, to the point where they run out of habitat or pose a severe threat to livestock.
Section 2. The fundamental niche and the limits of life.
Even if a population has all the space to roam and all the food they could ever eat, they're ultimately at the mercy of abiotic factors. These are the physical, non-living features of the environment, and temperature is arguably the most powerful abiotic factor of the whole shebang. Sometimes, the limits of life are drawn by violent, totally isolated physical extremes. A single severe freeze in an otherwise mild decade, or a sudden lightning-initiated fire can completely wipe out a population or stop it dead in its tracks from expanding into new territory. These aren't just minor setbacks. These extreme temperature events define the absolute, hard borders of where a species can exist.
Most of the time, though, the temperature constraint is more like a steady, invisible cage. Back in 1917, Joseph Grinnell coined a term for this, the fundamental niche. Also known as a physiological optimum, this fundamental niche represents the limited range of physical conditions, especially temperature, where a species functions at its absolute best. If the environment gets too hot or too cold outside this niche, the organism simply cannot survive there. Honestly, it doesn't matter how much food is available. If the temperature is wrong, it's game over.
Section 3. Internal heat regulation, zooming in to the micro view.
So if temperature is the grand architect of where animals can live, how do individual bodies fight back? Zooming all the way in, from the macro landscape down to the micro machinery of the animal body, we can divide the animal kingdom based entirely on the source of their heat. Now, what's really interesting about this is how stark the contrast is. Endotherms, like mammals and birds, generate their own internal heat through metabolism. They are literally walking internal furnaces. On the flip side, we have ectotherms, like reptiles and invertebrates. They rely entirely on external heat sources, like basking on a rock in the sun, just to warm themselves up and get moving. But it's not just about where the heat comes from, it's about how stable they keep it. Homeotherms maintain a very narrow, constant internal temperature. Meanwhile, heterotherms allow their body temperature to swing widely right along with the environment. Usually, birds and mammals are both endothermic and homeothermic, but, nature absolutely loves an exception. Take hibernating bats. When winter hits, their metabolism just plummets and they completely stop maintaining that constant temperature. They effectively become heterothermic for the season, allowing their bodies to drop to near freezing temperatures, sometimes hovering just a few degrees above zero. All of that just to survive the winter. And when the cold is immediate and life-threatening, bodies have to take extreme action. Imagine the Arctic bee. To survive freezing temperatures, these incredible little insects can rapidly contract their muscles without actually moving their wings or legs. This intense, stationary shivering liberates massive amounts of energy, raising their internal body temperature by a staggering 15 degrees Celsius. It's just an incredibly intense internal struggle against the abiotic limits of their freezing world.
Section 4. How temperature shapes bodies and the biological rules of nature.
This lifelong, intense struggle to regulate internal heat doesn't just affect behavior. Over thousands of years, it physically sculpts the shape and size of animals across different geographic regions. Back in 1847, Carl Bergmann noticed a really distinct pattern. He observed that among closely related animals, the populations living in higher, colder latitudes are consistently larger than their relatives down in warmer climates. This concept is now known as Bergmann's rule, and it's been observed in everything from moose in Sweden to salamanders, turtles, flatworms, and, believe it or not, even ants.
Which brings us right back to our opening question. Why are polar bears so massive? So the crucial point here is geometry. An animal with greater mass has a smaller surface area to volume ratio. Think of it kind of like a giant thermos. There's this massive volume of heat-generating tissue on the inside, but relatively little exposed skin on the outside for that heat to escape from. This brilliantly conserves heat in the freezing Arctic. Conversely, we have Allen's rule, which notes that animals in cold climates also tend to have shorter appendages, smaller ears, shorter legs, to further reduce the surface area exposed to that biting cold.
Section 5. The greenhouse effect and the planetary shift. We've seen how ancient and powerful these temperature boundaries are, but now we have to zoom all the way back out to the planetary level. The global thermometer is changing, and it is actively rewriting these ancient biological rules as we speak. The mechanism driving this is the greenhouse effect. Normally, shortwave solar radiation passes through our atmosphere, warms the Earth, and radiates back out as long-wave infrared radiation. But an increase in anthropogenic or human-caused gases like carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and chlorofluorocarbons, they act exactly like a thick blanket. They absorb that long-wave radiation and re-radiate it right back to the surface. This creates a gradual but highly impactful elevation of the Earth's surface temperature.
Section 6. Nature on the move and shifting boundaries. The ecological fallout of this warming isn't some distant theoretical future. It's happening right now. Because species are locked into their fundamental niches, those very specific temperature ranges they need to survive. A warming planet means the actual map of where they can live is being physically dragged across the globe. Let's move to the next logical step and see how this builds. As the equatorial and temperate zones heat up, the physiological optimum for countless species is shifting. To escape the heat and stay within their fundamental niches, a massive range of taxonomic groups are already marching poleward, shifting their ranges further and further north.
Nature is on the move, completely driven by the invisible hand of temperature. But here's the reality. The Earth is only so big, and the poles only go so far. As those fundamental niches march northward, we're left with a really critical question to ponder. As the global thermometer rises, which species will actually be able to adapt or migrate in time, and which will simply run out of room? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope it gave you a fresh new lens through which to view the incredible, yet fragile, balance of population ecology on our planet. See you next time.
Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Stay tuned.